UCLA is in turmoil, and Washington is poised to take advantage.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure you click that subscribe button, click that little bell down below as well, so you don't miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio-only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the program out a lot. Now, Lars, we've got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. It's officially Apple Cup week, so we need to talk about the importance of Jedd Fisch picking up his first road win at Martin Stadium this coming Saturday. We need to talk about, I think, one of the biggest keys to the game that we will hammer throughout the week, and that's forcing turnovers, especially after the Cougs had 5 and just crushing defeat to North Texas. We'll get there in a little bit, because the biggest news of the weekend, just across college sports, is DeShaun Foster's out after 3 games at UCLA. And we've got questions from across the board about some of these guys that have already decommitted from UCLA. We're going to stick with the Washington targets of David Schwerzel, Anthony Jones, and Ramzak Fruean, 3 players in the front 7. Do you think that these guys are players that Washington's going to be in on moving forward? Because I think absolutely.
Well, certainly the defensive lineman. Ramzak Fruean is kind of the one where it depends on where you see him fitting, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But definitely Jones and Schwerzel, 2 guys, Schwerzel being the local kid, Anthony Jones being from Cretin Lutheran, who UW has put a lot of emphasis in over the past couple of seasons. You would think that you kind of understood in a way why those guys committed to UCLA over Washington, because Washington offers something that UCLA doesn't, which is now why UCLA is in the position that they are, looking for a head coach, and UW is potentially going 3-0 against Wazoo. And you look at that and say, why not circle back around? This is where we talk about relationships, where they developed those guys, the relationship with those guys, but still didn't burn those bridges. So you can look back and say, well, you only have 2 or 3 defensive line commits, and you need to add at least 2 or 3 more. I'm not saying you're going to get all 3, but if you look and say, hey, if one of Schwerzel and Jones ends up at Washington, let's say Schwerzel just for the local tie-in here with O'Day and things like that, that's a good win. And you take that and you develop him, and that kind of proves out why the relationships and everything that we talk about kind of comes to fruition in that, because that is a position of need that they're going to hammer home in this class, and why not take advantage of some of those guys there.
So absolutely. Let's start with David Schwerzel, 4-star defensive lineman, as you said, from O'Day High School here in Seattle. And this is the kind of guy where, especially when you go back and you just kind of look through how his recruitment played out, you're going to notice a theme here. He was someone who was crystal balled to Washington at a certain point in time. And right before he announces, gets flipped to UCLA, obviously that's where he winds up going. And this is one of those ones where, I was talking about this on our Friday show, where there's a whole bunch of different players. And it's not just David Schwerzel, where UCLA, and this is, again, as you said, one of the reasons they're in the position they were in is they shelled out to go get a whole bunch of these 4-star guys from up and down the West Coast. I know they got an edge rusher from Massachusetts, shout out, that's also a member of this class too, where you just look at what they were trying to do and, you get it. It's okay. We like this guy. We're going to make sure we, do everything in our power to get him. Washington has done that with certain players and not with others. And that's why we've seen some go elsewhere and some, just still be part of the recruiting process as, we look at it today. I think David is one of those guys where Washington is still obviously, and never was not, very interested in taking him. They just were very much sticking to their evaluation, where it didn't seem like UCLA was. And with David, it's something where I think he's probably going to be a redshirt wherever he winds up going. And that's probably the best plan for him, so he can gain weight and wind up playing 3-tech at the next level, just be more of a defensive tackle, where right now he's playing edge rusher at O'Day. And as he just gains that weight and gains that strength, UCLA just wanted him to play right away. And I think that's one of the biggest things to consider in all this, is they want to just get him on the field and just, give him whatever else it was on top of that to make sure that he was in Westwood versus Seattle. And as we just kind of look at what's next with this process for him, especially, I feel like this is going to come down to UW and Stanford. Those are the other 2 teams in his top 3. And this is one of those things where all of a sudden if David does wind up at Washington, I feel like in terms of evaluations, in terms of just optics of this class, all of a sudden it looks a whole lot better than for some people who are saying, well, I still want to see this. Well, I still want to see that, to see another local 4-star defensive lineman in the boat.
And speaking of Stanford, just to go off on, well, what about their thoughts? Frank Reich, like, are you really going to roll with that one? I think at the end of the day, this is why Washington is in the perfect position for David Schwerzel, because of the other schools. UCLA, okay, go commit there, but might not sign there. Washington is probably the best fit for David Schwerzel, short and long term, to where you get to stay home, play in front of your family. But honestly, for the betterment of your college career, you should take another year to develop. And I think that would be the perfect opportunity for him. He doesn't need to go to a lower level to play and then transfer. Washington wants you. They just want you at the right, kind of situation. And for David, I think it's good for him to see that, okay, not good for him to see that. You don't want anybody to get fired. But you look at, DeShaun Foster, that was never going to work there. From the moment he stepped on the podium, it just was a train wreck. And I think David would not benefit from going to UCLA. And I think, he's going to learn that. And I think as we get to, let's say, October, November, December, if he ends up signing with Washington, neither of us are going to be surprised.
So I feel like Anthony Jones is someone who you can also throw in this boat, where another guy who had a crystal ball to Washington, and it was down to UW, UCLA, and Tennessee. And one thing that I think is really important to note here with not just Anthony Jones, but with Ramzak Fruean as well, the 3-star linebacker from Bethel High School here in the greater Seattle area, is these guys have not taken official visits to Washington yet. And I think at the very least, as this recruiting process, I don't think it's necessarily going to be fast. Like, oh yeah, this guy's at Washington. Oh, that, Anthony Jones, let's say he goes to Tennessee. I don't think it's going to be fast by any stretch of the imagination, because he committed like late April, early May, somewhere in that ballpark. So I think that both of these guys will have an opportunity to take a couple of visits and just really see what the plan is for them. And with Anthony, I feel like it's very similar to what it is with David Schwerzel, where he's got a really nice frame to play on the interior in this Ryan Walters scheme. And maybe UCLA said, hey, we like you a little bit more as an edge. And obviously that's the position that gets a whole lot more glory at the NFL level and everything like that. So I think that that's something that certainly has appealed to some of these guys in the short term. But when you look at what it can be long term, I really like the fit, as you said, with both David and Anthony, what it would be at Washington. I'm very curious to see if it plays out that way. But this is why Washington is in such a good position to take advantage of all this, was, playing the long game. We didn't expect to turn out like this. Like if DeShaun Foster got fired at the end of the year, maybe we're not as surprised, but 3 games in the year, losing to New Mexico the way that they did, I don't think anybody saw that happening. And just the way that this looks right now, like Washington, again, is in position to take advantage of this. And I'm really curious to see how this is going to play out, because again, the optics of just adding these 2 guys would be massive, let alone Ramzak Fruean as well.
And I think, Ramzak is kind of the X factor in this. And in a way, you get to sort out your linebacker position. You get to decide where you want to start him out at. And I think you look at also how this defensive class is built out. Like, I know it's not the same position, but look in the secondary. There's a lot of versatility there. And I think when you fast forward that to, kind of bring it down to the defensive line, why not add a few guys who you can redshirt and wait and plan to figure out what your plan is going to be for 18 months from now? That's important, because you want that depth long term, knowing that doesn't preclude you from still adding a couple guys either in the portal or, that we're not even talking about right now, that pop up on the radar and say, hey, you flipped, this kid from an SEC school or this kid from a Big Ten school that we're not even talking about, like Jack Schaefer and those types of flips that come out of not nowhere, but just ones we're not immediately talking about. You can take both of those scenarios where you have the guys that you already have relationships with. I mean, Schwerzel hasn't taken an official to Washington, but dude's been
Schwerzel did. Jones and Ramzak didn't.
Jones didn't, but I'm saying Ramzak would be an example of a guy where he knows Washington very well. But, you don't need that guy to come in early, but you need him to be a part of the program too, as Jedd continues to make that in-state. So you go top to bottom, and that's the bottom guys really do end up kind of carrying a lot more weight in the state than they get credit for.
So as a top 5 player in the state, I don't know if he necessarily falls into that category, but I hear your point, because this is something where 6'4", 220, it was always kind of like, okay, what's his best fit at the next level? And one thing that it sounded like during the recruiting process was, former UW defensive coordinator as well, Akaka Malloy, was really selling him on the fact of playing edge rusher, outside linebacker. And so if you just come in and let him sit in the system and develop a lot like, the way that Washington moved Hayden Moore from inside linebacker to outside, there's certainly something to be said for that, because he's just such a big powerful, explosive athlete. And if you can get him to add 25 pounds, 30 pounds and play at 245, 250, somewhere in that ballpark, I think you'd be really, really happy with that. And it's something where you're keeping a local kid home, you're taking a high upside athlete, and it's also just probably the biggest position of need right now on this roster when you just look at recruiting and look where this whole team is right now. And I'm just really curious to see how this is going to play out over the next couple of weeks and months. But let's turn our attention to this week because Washington's defense needs to force turnovers in the Apple Cup. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at the Game Cap. Quick question for all you college football fans out there. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, what hat would you be wearing? Yes, I said hat. For me, it would be the game. These aren't just hats. They're the same vintage styles worn back in the 80s and 90s. And guess what? They still go for the same price they did back then. When you use code LOCKEDON, you'll get your vintage hat for $16.99. Head to thegamecaps.com. Grab your team's classic bar or retro circle design, which are just so awesome, by the way. Those vintage designs are really fun to look at. And use code LOCKEDON for an exclusive discount because legends wear the game. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-hour energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with 0 sugar and 0 crashes. What I love most is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get that boost when you need it. Honestly, I love how fast they kick into and the fact that it's sugar-free, so I don't have to worry about crashing later. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-hour energy shots. Get the favorites you love or be bold and try something new in-store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. So, Lars, as we look ahead to this Wazoo game, one thing that Jedd Fisch has mentioned, he mentioned it during his bye-week press conference, and John Richardson mentioned it throughout the offseason, Ryan Walters did as well, is that this defense needs to force turnovers. They're trying to turn those good plays into great plays. And we've seen a couple of them. The McEllisteen interception against Colorado State came at a really, really nice time and was a really great play to rip the ball out of the receiver's hands. And then obviously Tacario Davis's pick against UC Davis showed elite closing speed and why he's one of the best corners in the country, in my opinion. And it's something where that's great, but as Jedd Fisch said, it's not enough. And we need to be doing more, to quote him there. And when we look ahead to this Washington State game, they just turned the ball over 5 times against North Texas in a 59-10, just blowout loss. And that's something where when I look at what this UW team can do this week, I feel like all the talent is there. And unlike last year, where I think Wazoo was certainly a little bit underestimated, especially by us, we can look just at what the talent disparity is in this matchup and say, especially, along the defensive line and in the secondary, there are so many guys who have the ability to make plays and need to in this game.
John Mateer ain't quarterback at Wazoo anymore. I'll tell you how much for certain. But I think it speaks to just that you hit on it perfectly. The talent gap between Washington and Washington State, specifically, on the secondary and the offense, this is one where I'd put the over under at 2.5 turnovers, and you better have the over. I think this is a game where, especially on defense, if you're Ryan Walters, you have no excuse. Where if North Texas can do that, sure, my guy, like you are the head coach of the defense for a reason. Why Jedd brought you to this job. You have all the tools. Ephesians should have. I think Ephesians and Tacario, I'll make an early bowl prediction, will each get an interception in this game. And then I think the third turnover should come maybe in a forced fumble or something like that. But this is a game where you absolutely have to make your presence felt. It should be the UC Davis game. Just run it back. But except get the turnovers. Get more than just the interception. Get kind of really assert yourself and get that non-conference kind of slate completely clean. Let Jedd get a true road victory because, looking at his tenure, he's never lost back-to-back road games and rivalry games ever in college. Michigan, Arizona, and potentially UW. But you look at it and say, not only should you not lose, you should own this. Like, prevent it. Don't just prevent it. Make a statement. And I think that's what you can do this weekend.
So I want to make sure we, continue talking about that a little bit later on too, because that's absolutely what you need to do this weekend in order to just, it's still a lesser quality opponent compared to, the Big Ten. But in terms of, it's a step up from especially last week against UC Davis. So there's still a lot to just say, okay, yeah, this is better, that's better. But you're right. There isn't anything keeping Washington from finding a way to cover. I know the lines opened somewhere. I believe it was 20.5 with our good friends over at FanDuel. Might have changed since I said this, but I look at what Washington can do in this game on the defensive side of the ball. And you talk about Takario Davis and Ephesians Prasak. Having this pair of 6'4" suffocating corners on the outside is so important to how this Ryan Walters scheme is going to operate. And I feel like, especially when, you look at the comments, you listen to what some of our everydayers are saying, a lot of them still want to see more out of this defensive line, where you've got 5 sacks for the first 2 games. And that number is solid, but I think that's the number that I'm looking at more than anything in this game, where turnovers are extremely important. Yes. But if you're able to just get after the passer and record 3-4 sacks in this game with, pressure from Zach Durfee, pressure from Jacob Lane, Isaiah Ward, all these guys coming off the edge who really need to step up if you want to see this defense take that next step this year. I think that's what I'm going to be looking at. And then, of course, if, 1 or 2 of them turn into fumbles, I think obviously you're going to be more than happy with that.
I agree with that. I just think it almost doesn't matter where it comes from. It just has to come. I think more so the names you mentioned, Zach Durfee, but you can even talk about Ontario Thompson, some of the interior guys, just getting that pressure, owning the line of scrimmage, show that even in a better, against better competition, you still have that level of ownership. That's kind of why I say run it back.
Oh, I hear
Davis you. Because you should be able. Ironically, you mentioned the line from this coming weekend. It was 6.5, almost 7 last season. Yeah. And obviously you'd have lost that game, but the line shows, hey, okay, this is an even better UW team, so you should assert yourself. There's no reason why you can't. This offseason, we've talked about it for 5, 6, 7 months now. You went to go get the horses. You have Tai Uyunglele. This should be his coming out party. He should have 3, 2.5 tackles for loss, maybe a sack and a forced fumble. No matter who it is, this is a game where the game ball should go to the defensive line. And you can say Takario and Ephesians can benefit from that, like I said. But the reason why those guys get the interceptions is because you're forcing either Zevi or Jaxon Potter, whichever ends up being quarterback for Wazoo. I don't think it's going to matter, truly. Zevi does provide a little bit of mobility, and I think that's why if you're able to kind of fluster him, that's where maybe a couple fumbles can come into play. But again, all of these things are to say you have the defense that should own Wazoo, and there's not even really a second thought, because to me, how do you look at that North Texas game and put up any better of an argument? To me, UW has way better talent. So to me, it's just a matter of find the right game plan, let it shine through, and come back to Pullman and come back to Seattle and think Takario, Big Ten Player of the Week, or Tai, Big Ten Player of the Week on defense. It has to start there because we know the offense is going to be fine.
Yeah, I like where you're going with it, because it's about the high expectations. It's about setting up for success and finding different ways to just produce, because that's the one thing that I think, again, is we've seen this offense in the first couple of weeks find tremendous success. We saw the offense, and I know it doesn't always translate to success, but there's certainly something to be said for it, outgain its first 8 opponents last season as well. These are things that at the end of the day, and you just dive into the numbers, they all certainly matter. And I look at what the defense has shown you on the surface level. There are certainly things that need to improve, but there isn't one thing that I would say from this defense where I just look at it and say, oh, I'm extremely concerned about this. I think there's still a lot of ways that this defense can improve and prove that, hey, yeah, we belong with, the top 6 in the Big Ten, let's just call it. There are a lot of ways that this team can still get to that level. I think, run fits especially is a big one, and getting pressure on the quarterback are the 2 that I really want to see. And I think if you're able to do those things up front, everything on the back end will fall into place. We've seen Alex McLaughlin star for the first couple of weeks. I've been so impressed with what he brings to the table. We look at, I think we're going to see a lot more Rashawn Clark this week as well. We look at what that guy has done. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that'll be my bold prediction on Friday. So stay tuned for that. Maybe he gets his first career interception in this game. But there are so many different ways that Washington has gone out and upgraded this defense at every single level. And now it's about coming through when it's needed, because it's one of those things where, last year, you look at the one turnover, you weren't able to really capitalize on the interception that Thaddeus Dixon gave you in that game last year. And I think about what this game can be and what this game should be. There are 2 different ways that this goes. And especially, again, to just kind of tease what we'll be getting to in a minute, Washington is still not won a game away from Husky Stadium in Jedd Fisch's tenure. And one thing that can make that really easy is shortening the field, giving yourselves easy opportunities to score, because even especially now that they lost 59-10 last week, that this is going to be a juiced up and angry Washington State team that wants to come out and, prove doubters wrong after what they did last week. And the fact that it's the Apple Cup and the fact that they're defending it after coming over to Seattle and beating the Huskies last year, I think that there's a lot to be said that the defense will decide this game.
I'm surprised we got through this entire segment without the one guy we should probably also highlight in this.
And Buda Alukta.
There we go. Like, if Buda ends up being the guy that has, leads the team with 12, 13, 14 tackles, I think that's a guy who's had motivation, because he's proven this season the missed tackles weren't all on him last season. And I think this might be his coming out party as well.
I like where you're going with that. There really is a lot to think about when it comes to just the back end of this defense, especially. And we're going to be talking about that all week on Locked On Huskies. But one of the most important things in this game is Jedd Fisch winning a game away from home. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Prize Picks. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick, easy, and honestly my favorite way to follow along with more football. The best part, even if one of your picks misses, Prize Picks invented the flex play so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. We've also got a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, player props, building a same-game parlay, my personal favorite, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game even more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. I think this is still the elephant in the room as we enter game 16. I was just trying to do the math off the top of my head there of the Jedd Fisch era. Yeah, I got it right. Jedd Fisch has not won a game away from Husky Stadium. You just have to call a spade there. And one thing that I've kind of noticed over the first couple of weeks of this Husky season, where people are still, that's why we want to talk about the defense before we got to this, are still a little concerned about what it might look like in that regard and what that might look like, when Ohio State comes to town on the 27th. But you can't overlook what this matchup is. And I think that if some members of this fan base will see Jedd Fisch, even if it's not a convincing win, I'm sure there's going to be, its own set of questions if that is what happens, if it's, let's just say it's a 3-point game. But no matter the cost, if Jedd Fisch and the Huskies walk out of Martin Stadium with a win, I feel like it can really change the tune of what his second year at Washington can be and help people realize, okay, yeah, maybe this team is ready to take a step forward.
I agree. In a sense, so let me tell you something ironic. His first win in 2022 at Arizona was at San Diego State. So he got the monkey off the back right away. Now, this time you had to wait a little bit to go to Wazoo after facing UC Davis and Colorado State. But it goes to show after that 1-11 season, Jedd knew how to fix the problem. And I think we both have talked about, he addressed all the kind of problems that aided Washington last season. So there's no reason why he shouldn't get his first win on the road this season. But again, you can still see there's going to be some pessimism, Sure. Can Jedd get out of his own way? Where against UC Davis and Colorado State, sure, there's probably not even a worry about that. But against Wazoo in a rivalry game, that's where it kind of can get dicey. And we've seen that, in the 21 game. Nobody wants to talk about it because Junior Adams and Bob Gregory were co-head coaches in that game. So, but again, can you tell me the last time, and this is going to be an easy answer in hindsight, but when was the last time a UW coach lost back-to-back games against
Ty
Wazoo?
Willingham, 2007, 2008.
Yep. And I think it was George Bush was in office. So again, that shows you how long ago.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
So you bring up a great point there. The one thing that I want to go back to when you say addressing different ways to, just getting out of his own way. one of the biggest ones, and I don't think this one was necessarily a Jedd Fisch problem. It was more of a personnel problem going back to how, not so much how, but when the roster needed to be constructed. And that was the offensive line, where, yeah, you were still able to, like, I know Jonah Coleman had 9 carries for 81 yards in that Iowa game. You weren't able to just establish the run the ball, shorten the game the way that you might have wanted in some of these different road games last year. Not to mention the fact that you played 3 college football playoff teams on the road, because that's all null and void, because you didn't win at Rutgers, who was, an okay team. You didn't win 3 miles down the road from Husky Stadium at Lumen Field. Like, these are still things that did not happen. So I look at what this game can be, and I think that that's kind of where I'm probably going to just hammer home all week is I'm not going to, knock the talent level of a lot of these guys following head coach Jimmy Rogers from South Dakota State to Washington State, because if he thinks they can play, great, they can play. But you look at the size difference that Washington has on the offensive line, I think that that's certainly something to just point out. And then on top of that, we look at just the difference in the skill level along the offensive line, bringing in Carver Willis, who's looked tremendous over the first couple of weeks, John Mills, who has been excellent, Landon Hatchett, who has certainly improved after not really being healthy at this point last season. Garen Hatchett's been solid. Drew Party has greatly improved. This offensive line is just so much better. And it's something where you go back and you look at Jonah Coleman at Washington State a couple of years ago. He was tremendous in that game. So he's been there before. He knows that environment and he's played well there. So it's one of those things where he's been one of, if not the best player in the country so far through the first couple of games. Why not continue? Just feed him.
Absolutely. I mean, do you know where Jimmy Rogers was in 2007, 2008?
I don't. I
He was
don't think people want to know where I was. So
fair point. So he was at South Dakota State still as a sophomore, junior linebacker. Jedd Fisch was in the NFL. That is the gap right there that you're kind of talking about. And the reason why I say that is to say Jedd can lean into that NFL pedigree, show that you have that experience because you have the talent. You have all the pieces there, put it together in a way where there is no doubt about anybody in anybody's mind after Saturday night or Saturday afternoon, evening, whatever you want to call it, when you're on that flight back to Seattle from Pullman, there was no question. And I think that's the thing that Jedd has to hammer home and that we're going to continue, as you said, to hammer home this week. It's not just about winning the game and getting that first. Again, if it by some freak issue happens to be a 38-35 game and you still come away with the win, great. It's a very bare minimum here, come away with the win. But it's almost like saying UW is going to be 6-6 this season. It's like, okay, bare minimum. That's honestly should be 8-4. The bar has been raised by Jedd this offseason.
That's the most important thing.
And this game is not the most important on UW's schedule. It is the most important on Wazoo's schedule. Make that mean something, because if you can win that game so easily that Wazoo is kind of, that they're way down there, that just kind of hammers home like, hey, you are a Big Ten program. Put them away. Don't even let them hang around. And I think this is the weekend where Jedd can show his mentality has changed because, like you said, Drew's improved. The whole offensive line from left to right's improved. Damon is certainly improved being a starter. Jonah seems like he's found another gear. Adam Muhammad could have a 100-yard game in his own right because he was almost there against UC Davis. All the pieces are there. No matter what happens at receiver, no matter really what happens on defense, because the defense has pieces too, they're all there to just make this a no doubt about it. And I think that will really springboard them into the Ohio State game where whatever happens, but put it with so much conviction that you leave no doubt.
So I love what you're saying. And I don't disagree with the points that you're making, but one thing that you said, I just feel like I have to address. And you said it's not the most important game on Washington's schedule. That's where I disagree, because the most important game on your schedule, I feel like I need a coach speak buzzer for this. The most important game on your schedule is the one in front of you, because it's one of those things where it is completely unacceptable in my mind to lose this game at this point, especially after losing your first Apple Cup. The style and the fashion that you lost that game in, not even just the speed option on the goal line. There are so many different plays that you can go back and point to in that game. The 12, 13, 14, however many penalties there were, the 3rd and 20 scramble for a touchdown before the half. There are so many plays that you can go back and look at in that game and just say, this was unacceptable. That was unacceptable. This is unacceptable. And right now, not even just, to look at the grander schedule, you have to play who's in front of you, and you can't overlook them, no matter the fact that the number one team in the country is coming into your building next week. You cannot overlook this team in front of you. The fact that they're an in-state rival, the fact that you know that fan base is still pissed after the whole Big Ten, Pac-12 just explosion, all of that. I don't want to talk about conference realignment. You know that that's all still part of this as well. And you're still right when you say that you need to go in there and leave no doubt, because especially with the way that every single road game went last year, like that is something that should be on your mind. But you look at the way that this game played out last season, and right now that does make it the most important game on your schedule, because you look what Colorado State was, you look what UC Davis was. This is certainly a step up from where both of those teams were. And as you continue to move forward, yeah, there are going to be bigger, more talented tests next week. I don't know. I don't know if I said it like 30 seconds ago or something. The number one team in the country is coming into your building next week. Yeah, that's probably going to be a much bigger test, but it's not going to look the same if you're 2-1. Like it's not. So you can't overlook who's in front of you. And the fact that you have the bye week before it is weird and uncomfortable, because I know neither of us are used to that, but this is still something where it's you certainly need to find a way to put these guys away, but not overlook them at the same time.
I think it kind of is mirrored together where you don't overlook them. You just hammer them home. I think that's, you don't hammer them home so you can get to Ohio State. It's just demolish them. And then, by the way, guess what? Who's next on your schedule? Then you deal with it then. But I think that's why it's just leave no doubt. Get the flag planting taste out of your mouth if you still have any left. Get, every single thing that could be negative out of your mouth in this game and put all the energy into this game. You're right.
No, I couldn't agree with you more there. That's where it needs to be. Because all of a sudden, I feel like, you're 3-0, Ohio State's coming to town. Maybe if there's some other festivities that might come along with that, which would be a lot of fun. You look at what it could be, and all of a sudden, I think the energy around this program, I don't want to say it's drastically shifted, because Jedd Fisch has done a tremendous job of doing that through the first two games. And you look at what Jonah Coleman brings to the table. You look at what DeMond brings to the table. All of these guys who have already contributed in some way, shape, or form this year. There is so much to be excited about. But I think this is the game where all of a sudden, oh yeah, you won by 3 touchdowns in the Apple Cup. Were you supposed to, in terms of, what the betting numbers are? Sure. But at the same point in time, like, that's still something that I think people will look at and say, oh, okay, awesome. This is great to see. We can keep talking about, everything going along with this right now. And yeah, I'm going to just be more energized by what's going on. And I think that's really important as well. And Lars, before we get out of here today, I have a final thought that I need to get off my chest. Shout out to Rome Odunze, man. Career day today as we record this on Sunday. 7 catches, 128 yards, 2 touchdowns. Yeah, the Chicago Bears lost in horrendous fashion to the Detroit Lions. But you look at what Rome Odunze is bringing to the table. He's already matched his career touchdowns from his career high in touchdowns. What he did last season with 3 scores. And this guy's going to be a superstar for the Chicago Bears. He's going over 1,000 yards this year. I think he gets 10 to 12 touchdowns. I think he's a Pro Bowler this year. So awesome to see what he's doing. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, from the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the program out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.